This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. I have a girlfriend I've been in a relationship with for many years. She's gentle and always cries easily. When we were young, if she made a mistake on a test, she would tug at my sleeve and cry. Rocky, why is this question so difficult? When she first got her driver's license and had an accident, she called me in tears. Rocky, what should I do? I used to think she was delicate and needed to be carefully protected. But later, when I was on the autopsy table and she was performing the autopsy, she didn't shed a single tear. She just gently asked, Rocky, does it hurt? I never expected that after Haley became a forensic pathologist, the first body she would perform an autopsy on would be mine. Just 3 days ago, we had a big meal together at the Hot Pot restaurant downstairs. At that time, she had just been confirmed as a permanent staff member and eagerly pulled me to celebrate. Her eyes were filled with anticipation for her future career, sparkling like they were full of stars. As she stuffed her mouth full, she said to me with her mouth full, Rocky, forensic pathologists are the final checkpoint. I will definitely punish the wicked and uphold justice, making those people pay the price. I listened to her words and smiled. After smiling, I wiped the oil from the corner of her mouth with a tissue. I said, okay, our Haley will definitely become the best forensic pathologist. She smiled at my words, then buried her head back into her meal. That was my Haley. Lively, beautiful, full of hope for everything. Not like now, standing in front of my corpse, calm and composed. Holding the scalpel, she meticulously cut into my skin. 8 ribs are broken, splenic and lung rupture. Intracranial hemorrhage, with a depression on the top of the head, indicating external force. Right leg has a comminuted fracture. She methodically listed these somewhat harsh terms in my world. I stood behind her, watching. Her hair was tied back in a low ponytail, and she wore a pink dress I had given her under her white lab coat. She worked on the autopsy for 3 hours, without taking a minute off. When someone called her to eat, she didn't go. Only when the sun set and she had completed all the examinations and filled out the autopsy report did she finally sit down beside me, looking down at me. I watched her anxiously as she pressed her face against my forehead and gently asked, Rocky, does it hurt? With so many wounds, does it hurt? The day I met Haley was a snowy day. As usual, I was helping the orphanage director organize the donor accounts. As I came out of her room, I saw a small person standing at the orphanage gate. At that time, Haley was only 7 or 8 years old, about as tall as my waist. But she was very beautiful, with a delicate face and a red nose from the cold, holding a pink doll, quietly looking at me, crying, I can't find my mom. I looked at her without speaking, thinking everyone here has lost their mom. Later, she became one of us. The orphanage director handed her over to me, saying she would be my little sister from now on. I had no objections, thinking it was just a matter of extra chopsticks. But soon, I realized she was a crybaby. If her doll was lost, she would cry and grab my pants. Brother, I'm scared. If other kids bullied her, she would cry and hold my hand. Brother, they say I'm a child without a mom. That was the first time I fiercely beat up those boys in the orphanage. Maybe it was the first time I had ever lost my temper so badly, and everyone was scared by me. I glared at them, held Haley in my arms, and coldly said, everyone here is a child without a mom. There's no need to criticize each other. If I hear this again, I'll tell the director to kick you all out. The children in the orphanage were most afraid of being abandoned. When I said this, their faces turned pale, and they dared not say such things about Haley again. It wasn't until much later that I learned from Haley that at that time, she thought I was like a deity descending from heaven, rescuing her life. She spoke of it with shining eyes. She said, Rocky, you're like a savior sent by heaven. I don't know if I was her savior, but I know she came to torment me. Since having her, I had to attend classes during the day and help the director at night, as well as tutor her. Every time I was strict with her, she would cry with 2 lines of tears and accuse me. Rocky, you're being mean to me again. Every time, I would surrender. What could I do? She's a girl. Isn't it okay to pamper her a little? So I pampered her and watched her grow from a small girl to someone almost as tall as me. After graduating from high school, I moved out of the orphanage, taking Haley, who had just entered high school, with me. She insisted on coming with me, and I couldn't resist her, so I took her along. As a result, I not only had to attend classes, but also work to support our living. Not only did I have to deal with her coursework, but I also had to watch out for the teenage boys who flocked around her because she was pretty. Afraid she might go astray, I repeatedly told her, Haley, we're still young. Studying is the most important thing, understand? At that time, Haley looked at me for the first time and remained silent. The orange desk lamp made her face exceptionally pale. After a while, she muttered, there are many things more important than studying. Like you, I got together with Haley at her 19th birthday party. That year, I had just started working as an intern reporter at a newspaper, traveling everywhere. Sometimes I went to places so remote that there was no signal. But Haley, spoiled by me since she was small, needed to talk on the phone to fall asleep. So every day, after work, I would walk a long way to the signal tower to call her. Occasionally, Haley would complain, "Rocky, I'm grown up now. You don't need to work so hard. I can earn money myself." I just smiled at her words. After smiling, I put on a serious face and said, "You're being so rude. Call me brother." But she refused, not only refusing, but also scolding me and hanging up the phone. My friend said I didn't understand girls' feelings, that she just wanted my company. What nonsense. How can I not understand? Haley is a rose I raised with my own hands. I lied to her, saying that I couldn't make it back on her birthday. On the phone, she cried again, her voice hoarse. "Rocky, what should I do if you don't come back?" My heart ached like it was being scratched by a cat, but I still said, "Haley, don't cry. When I make a lot of money, I'll buy you many pretty little dresses, okay?" She paused on the other end, then cried even harder. "Rocky, I'm grown up now. I don't want little dresses anymore." That was the first time I missed Haley's birthday. She was very angry and didn't reply to my messages for 3 days, until I showed up at her birthday party with roses. In her astonished and anxious expression, I slowly asked her, "Haley, you've grown up now. I've wanted to ask you a question for a long time. Can I stop being your brother and become your boyfriend?" That day, Haley cried so much that her makeup was ruined. Her neatly done hair fell over her shoulders, and she held my hand tightly, unwilling to let go. She said she was willing. She also said she had been willing since she was very young. I just smiled, wiped her tears, and hugged her tenderly like I did when she was little. But later, Haley grabbed my ear, gritting her teeth, and said, "Rocky, you're not allowed to scare me like that again. Building suspense is not the right way to give a surprise." She pulled hard, making me wince in pain. What could I do? A rose I raised can only be cared for by me. I couldn't trust anyone else. After I got together with Haley, I worked exceptionally hard, often staying late into the night. I wanted to provide Haley with a better future and make her life easier. Every time, she would bring me a bowl of supper and, with red eyes, urge me, "Rocky, you need to rest. It's too late." She always knew my weakness. Whenever she acted a little spoiled and shed a few tears, I felt like the whole world was at fault. I tried to reason with her, but she would only hide in my arms, shaking her head, saying, "Without you, I don't want any beautiful future." At that time, I thought she had become too spoiled by me. What would she do without me? Would anyone treat her as well as I did? But then I thought she wouldn't be without me. I would always be by her side unless I died. Later, I did die. I thought she would collapse, crying uncontrollably like a frightened little deer, not knowing what to do. But she didn't. She methodically performed the autopsy on my body and, with composure, submitted my autopsy report to the relevant departments. She simply asked me, "Rocky, are you in pain?" I wanted to tell her that I wasn't in pain, that it really didn't hurt, just a brain hemorrhage. I was more concerned for her. She had lost so much weight. Her once fitted dress now hung loosely. I wished I could hug her, tell her to eat well. I had worked so hard to fatten her up. How could she suddenly become so thin? Haley handled all my affairs. We hadn't married yet, and when asked for a family member's proof, she could only bring the orphanage director. After some effort, she finally brought my ashes back to our home. She took a bath as usual, changed into her pajamas, and then took my ashes to bed with her. I lay beside her as usual, reaching out to touch her face, but my hand passed through her face. I was stunned, seeing her hugging my ashes, her voice muffled. "Rocky, they all say you got what you deserved. They say it was just an accident and want me to take the money and drop the matter. Rocky, you see, without you, people are still bullying me." Her voice was very low, as if choked up, but when I looked around, I saw she wasn't crying. She pressed her face against my ashes and softly said, "Good night, Rocky." On the 4th day after my death, Haley resigned. I didn't expect that. I watched her in the office, holding my ashes, her spine straight. She wasn't wearing those flashy dresses I couldn't tell apart. Instead, she wore plain black clothes. No jewelry. Her black hair tied back in a low ponytail. She stood there unbowed as her boss shouted at her, "Haley, why can't you understand? The world isn't just black and white. Their family is powerful. Can't we ordinary people just take a step back? Why blow this matter up? What good does it do you?" His voice was loud, echoing in the small office. I worried about Haley. She was timid, easily scared. Whenever I spoke loudly, she would always look at me with tearful eyes. But now, she wasn't crying. Her face was expressionless as she touched my ashes and softly said, "There's no benefit, but my Rocky cannot die in vain." He feared pain the most. As I stood beside her, I suddenly remembered when Haley had just started college. I didn't know what had possessed her. One day, she suddenly told me she wanted to study forensic medicine and secretly change her major from clinical medicine to forensic medicine. That was the first time in my life I argued with her. I said, as a girl, wouldn't it be better to be a doctor and save lives? Why get involved with corpses? At that time, she lifted her little face, her voice firm though soft. If everyone thought like that, who would seek justice for those who died unjustly? I had no way to stop her when she insisted on changing majors. Now, seeing her resolutely resigning, I felt just as powerless. After Haley resigned, she lived a very leisurely life at home. Her biggest hobby each day was experimenting with cooking, but she didn't know how to cook. Pampered by me from a young age, she didn't even know how to boil noodles. Standing in the kitchen, frowning, which one is the salt? I stood behind her, pointing to the small bottle on her right. This one. But she picked the wrong one, didn't taste it, and added sugar instead. 5 minutes later, she brought a blackened mess to my ashes. Her eyes sparkling. Rockey, taste it. Is it good? I looked at the concoction, hesitated. Why don't you try it? She must have remembered to taste it and took a tentative bite, then turned pale and rushed to the bathroom. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her vomit in the bathroom, and suddenly found it amusing. But as I laughed, I heard her say, Rockey, I guess I'm only meant to eat takeout. I didn't speak, just stood there watching her. I was so close to her that I could hug her with a stretch of my arm. Yet I was so far away, unable to embrace her anymore. She posted about her daily life online. Initially, the likes were few and people mocked her. But later, she accidentally showed her face and the comments turned kind. Sometimes I would follow Haley in the background to read the comments, most of which praised her beauty. Of course, my Haley, whom I had nurtured with care for so many years, was beautiful. She began to gain popularity online, her outstanding appearance and poor cooking skills making her stand out. Almost overnight, she went from a pretty girl to a small blogger with 100,000 followers. Then many cultural media companies reached out to her. I watched her choose among the offers, eventually picking Gemini Media. When I saw that name, a sharp pain suddenly shot through my head, spreading to my chest, lower abdomen, and finally throughout my limbs. The scenes lost due to death began to intermittently reappear in my mind. I thought there would be no pain after death, but in that moment, it felt like I was falling apart, shaking with pain. I watched Haley as she looked up from the computer screen, touched my ashes, and asked softly, Rockey, do you think this is a good place to go? Haley successfully signed with Gemini Media. But unlike other broadcasters who were into merchandise or live streaming, her update frequency was very low. Every appearance was either sharing life or dancing. Not the lively K-pop dance, but graceful Chinese dance. With fluttering clothes, it looked very beautiful. When not updating, she spent most of her time on the balcony reading and letting my ashes bask in the sun. She had 2 pots of flowers on the balcony, colorful and unrecognizable to me, but she loved them, checking them 2 or 3 times a day. Later, her followers grew and her reputation improved, showing signs of becoming a top-tier broadcaster. So when Gemini called to invite her to the company's anniversary celebration, I wasn't surprised at all. It was Haley who seemed unusually silent. The other party was clearly anxious. Haley, for this anniversary, the boss is coming too. You won't regret it. If you seize this opportunity, you'll definitely become the top broadcaster. Haley replied, then hung up. I wanted to tell her not to go, not to become a blogger. She should remain pure, wearing her white lab coat, sincerely standing at the autopsy table, holding her future in one hand and her career in the other. But she couldn't hear me. She walked to her desk, looked at our photo together, then pulled out a notebook from the drawer. It was my work diary. She slowly flipped through it, page by page, her expression gradually softening, until the notebook started to mix in photos of female bodies, crying faces, fragments scattered among my notes. She looked for a while, then suddenly looked up as if sensing me and slowly said, Rockey, you tell me, what did you find out? What is it that made them want to kill you? Her eyes were reddening, her voice choking. I don't believe that evil can triumph over good. You didn't finish what you started. I will help you. When Haley went to the dinner party, she dressed up specifically for the occasion. Unlike the flashy and vibrant styles commonly seen, her beauty was fresh and understated. She wore a simple white dress, spun around in front of me several times, stuffed something into the dress, and then nodded in satisfaction. Over the years, I had taken very good care of her. She had never seen the darker side of human nature or endured any suffering. Even though she was approaching 30, she still looked pure and flawless, like the first lily of early spring. This unassuming quality was what most appealed to those who had struggled through the mire of life. She knew how to emphasize her strengths, so when Tony, the young master of Gemini media, showed interest in her, I wasn't surprised at all. He had invited Haley multiple times, trying to persuade her to join him on a yacht trip next week. Haley always smiled and shook her head, claiming she got seasick. She managed the distance perfectly. Tony grew a bit anxious. "Then let's go somewhere else, Miss Haley. As long as you accept my invitation." Haley, slightly surprised, still smiled and asked, "Is Mr. Tony trying to court me?" Her smile was beautiful, with her eyes curved in a way Tony had never seen, full of clarity. Tony looked somewhat entranced, but Haley didn't give him a chance to react. As soon as the party ended, she disappeared, leaving no trace. It was only when she got home that she removed her disguise and lay quietly next to my urn. We just stared at each other in silence until she fell into a deep sleep. News of Tony pursuing Haley quickly spread in the circle. He started by frequently visiting Haley's livestream, sending her extravagant gifts. Then he began sending flowers every day, each bouquet different, accompanied by a card that read, "I don't know what flowers you like, so I'm sending you all kinds." He really knew how to court someone, using methods that girls liked and didn't find offensive. He invited Haley to lunch and even bought her a sports car when she got caught in the rain on her way to a meeting. Everyone said Tony was genuinely smitten this time. The man who had played around with countless women was now seriously hooked. But Haley didn't care about any of this. Each meeting with Tony was meticulously calculated by her. The moment they parted, any affection in her eyes disappeared completely. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that someone's love could be so convincingly feigned. Tony, following a set routine, sent Haley various strange items daily. Haley only accepted a few inexpensive ones and returned the rest. Tony, having rarely encountered such a girl, was even more motivated to win her over. He declared he would pursue Haley no matter the cost. When Haley heard about this late at night, I stood by her, watching her listen silently, then hang up and smile slowly. She looked at my urn and softly said, "Rocky, look, I did it." I looked down at her, reached out to embrace her. My voice choked. Yes, my Haley is the best. 2 weeks after Tony made his declaration, Haley finally agreed to give it a try. Tony was so delighted he nearly wanted to set off fireworks to announce it to the world. He immediately organized a huge party and invited everyone, making it a grand event. But the most anticipated guest, Haley, suddenly vanished. Tony sent people searching everywhere, inside and out, but Haley was nowhere to be found. Only I knew that during her absence, she had gone to meet someone. When she reappeared, there were only 15 minutes left before the party started. Tony, who had been furious, was suddenly calmed when he saw Haley, now looking like a fairy that had descended to Earth in her meticulously prepared outfit. He walked over and took Haley's hand. "Haley, where have you been? I've been looking for you everywhere." Haley looked at him steadily for 2 seconds before replying. "I was a bit tired, so I found a place to take a nap." Tony glanced at her low-cut dress and said, "If you're tired, just take a nap. Tonight, I have some good friends coming over. It might end a bit late, so I won't be able to accompany you." Haley nodded, said nothing, and watched Tony leave. Others might not know what was behind Tony's party, but Haley, having seen so many of my reports, understood perfectly. This wasn't a place for the wealthy to entertain themselves. It was a den of vice for women. Gemini Media, publicly a talent agency, was actually a front for providing illicit services to major business figures. They used high signing bonuses to lure various types of women to sign contracts with Gemini, and then imposed high penalties for a breach of contract, forcing them to provide such services. As an intermediary, Tony only needed to provide a discreet location to receive invisible benefits and resources. Girls who disobeyed were either imprisoned, beaten, or even sold to Myanmar. I learned about all this one night when Haley's relatives arrived, complaining of feeling unwell. I stayed up late attending to them and was just about to sleep when I received a text message. It was short with just 2 words, "Save me." There was no information or details, just those 2 words. My colleagues suggested it might be a prank since there was no name or contact information, and it was hard to verify its authenticity. But Haley, when she learned, said, "What if it's true? You're her only hope." Indeed, my original goal as a journalist was to help those in need seek justice. I just didn't expect that this quest for for justice would be so difficult, so costly that it would cost my life and put Haley in danger. At first, she only wanted to retrieve the evidence I had collected, but after searching in vain, she decided to take the risk herself. I watched as she followed Tony, dressed in a pure white dress, standing on the deck and looking back. Her long hair was lifted by the wind, her face pale, but her gaze was frighteningly resolute. She pressed the alarm on her hand, and within 5 minutes, Tony was standing before her. The concern in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by hatred. "You called the police." His teeth were clenched, and I feared he might rush at Haley and strangle her the next moment. But Haley remained calm, nodding. Tony's eyes were bloodshot. "What do you know?" Haley looked up at him. "I know everything." "Was your approach from the beginning with a purpose?" Haley smiled. "If it weren't for your cautiousness, having yacht parties, and needing someone to get close to you, to find your exact location, I wouldn't even want to see you." Tony's face turned a ghastly white. "Do you think you can succeed? My yacht has signal jammers. Your calls can't go out." Haley stood in the night, her white dress making her look immaculate. She didn't respond, only stared at the water surface. After a while, she said, "But I never intended to succeed in calling the police." As soon as she finished speaking, Tony's face changed. "You have a tracker on you?" Haley didn't answer. She only gave him a stunning smile. The next second, a deafening alarm sounded. Then came the footsteps, gunshots, and various sounds blending together. Tony was dragged away, still fixated on Haley. Then, like a mad beast, he lunged at her, pulling her into the sea. Tony had always been a dangerous person. From the very first day I dealt with him, I knew this. He was highly suspicious and alert, and apart from his love for women, he had no other weaknesses. But even with women, it was rare for him to let his guard down. Haley was special, the only one. He had fallen for her. Once I knew that Tony had fallen for Haley, I realized that Haley couldn't walk away unscathed. A person like him despises betrayal the most. I was so resistant to Haley getting involved in this mess. She could have been wearing a pristine white lab coat, sitting in the forensic room, fighting for justice for others. Instead, she had to join me in this dead end. I had prepared for all possible consequences, but still, when she fell into the sea, it felt like I was dying all over again. I had never hated being a bodiless soul like this, unable to do anything but watch Haley's gradual downfall. My Haley had disappeared. After she was dragged into the sea by Tony, she disappeared for 3 days. That night, thanks to Haley using her own mobile phone as a receiver, the police were able to track down the cruise ship. They rescued all the women in distress, but they missed my Haley. She was imprisoned by Tony in a small room for 3 whole days. Tony always found ways to torment her, pulling out her hair, hitting her, cutting her skin bit by bit with a knife, and then pouring salt water on it. He just wanted to see Haley beg for mercy. But my Haley was not going to let him have his way. Even though she was in such pain that tears were streaming down her face, she did not say a word of pleading. She had long made up her mind to die, determined to finish what I wanted to do. But Tony came with a video from before my death. He pinched Haley's chin and said viciously, "I say I have no grudges against you. Why are you trying so hard to put me to death?" As he spoke, he played the video for her to see. "So this reporter is your boyfriend. Do you know how he died?" I saw Haley's eyes turn red immediately upon hearing this. She almost greedily watched the scene in the video where I was wailing in pain, and for the first time, she choked out a cry. I subconsciously reached out to cover her eyes. "Don't watch, Haley." But she couldn't hear me, and I couldn't block the view. Tony sat on the side. His bones were really tough. For a whole week, his bones were broken, and then fixed, and then broken again. All 10 fingernails were pulled out, and he still wouldn't say where he hid the evidence. His voice was very low, gentle, as if he was lulling Haley to sleep. But Haley was like an enraged lion, staring at him fiercely. He wouldn't say, "So you just killed him alive? Skull puncture? 8 ribs all broken." As soon as she said this, Tony started to go mad. He slapped Haley fiercely. He wouldn't say, "Of course I could only let him die. Not him dead, then me dead." After saying this, he held Haley in his arms with a look of tenderness. "Haley, I've never liked a woman like this before. If you promise me you won't think about that dead man anymore, I'll let you go. We can have a good life together, okay? I swear, I will give you the best things in this world. Everything that dead man could give you, I can give you." Haley was held in his arms, her blood staining his white shirt, but she seemed to feel no pain. She merely looked at the video where the image of me was frozen. I stood in front of her, watching her in a place and in a way she did not know, accompanying her. Suddenly, she smiled and then bit Tony's ear with a frenzy. She bit down with such force that Tony immediately cried out in pain, but she didn't let go. Instead, with tears in her eyes, she used all her strength to bite even harder. Only when the taste of blood filled her mouth and she felt a piece of flesh between her teeth. Did she let go, spitting out the chunk of meat? Tony's face twisted in pain as he covered his ear, blood streaming through his fingers. In retaliation, he kicked Haley forcefully. Haley recoiled in immediate pain. But before Tony could savor his triumph, he heard the sound of police sirens. He looked at Haley, gasping on the ground in disbelief. How is this possible? I checked thoroughly. There were no tracking devices on you. Haley, swaying as she stood up, replied, "Not on my body, but inside my body." As soon as she finished speaking, a flash of dark blue uniform appeared in her eyes. With the appearance of the uniform, Haley could no longer hold on and fell straight back. Haley woke up once more, this time in the hospital. She had been asleep for a long time. When she awoke, she asked only one thing: where is Tony? She then learned that when the police had burst in that day, Tony's first reaction had been to flee, refusing to surrender, and even taking her, already unconscious, as a hostage in a desperate bid to save himself. But someone who never spared others a chance to live didn't deserve any mercy himself. Thus, his final fate was life imprisonment. Later, for reasons unknown, he suddenly committed suicide one quiet night, and by the time he was discovered, his body had already stiffened. Upon hearing this news, Haley visibly relaxed, and then she became completely at ease, immersing herself in her own world and refusing to interact with the outside. The doctor said it was psychological trauma. Mental wounds required mental healing. But no matter how much the police questioned her, she refused to say another word. She was unwilling to communicate with anyone, like a delicate puppet. Her roommate was a young boy who had just started high school. He had been admitted for depression. Neither of them wanted to talk, and the room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. One day, the little boy suddenly broke the silence. He asked, "How did you get in here?" Having not spoken for so long, Haley was a bit unaccustomed. It took her a while before she turned her head to look at him. He was still wearing his blue school uniform, and the sunlight outside was very good, streaming through the window and shining on his face. She stared at him for a moment, then suddenly smiled. "You look a lot like my boyfriend." The little boy scoffed. "You're so thin, you look like a skeleton." "How could you have a boyfriend?" Haley smiled but said nothing. The little boy laughed again. "If you really do have one, why hasn't he come to see you all this time you've been here?" Haley paused at this, and a sudden sweet glow appeared on her face. "He'll be here soon. He'll come to get me very soon." The little boy didn't understand what she meant, but I did. That night, my Haley committed suicide in the hospital bathtub. I stood by her side, watching as her blood gradually dyed the entire tub red, and her complexion turned increasingly pale. Then I stayed, watching her body grow cold bit by bit. Finally, she appeared in front of me again. Her eyes welled up with tears as soon as she saw me. I couldn't help myself and pulled her tightly into my embrace. It was no longer an intangible feeling, but the real, solid Haley. I inhaled greedily at the nape of her neck, breathing in the scent that was uniquely Haley's. After a while, I spoke with a hoarse voice. "Fool, why leave the world that was treating you well to come here and suffer?" Haley didn't feel upset at being blamed. She just rubbed against me in my arms like a kitten. Then I heard her say, "But wherever you are, that's my world." The end of the main story. Epilogue asterisk. The night I saw Rocky's body was just an ordinary night. That day I was still working late. Rockey often said that if he had known being a forensic pathologist was so exhausting, he would have never let me choose this career. He was always like that, unwilling to see me suffer, unwilling to see me in pain. When I first met him, he was only 14 years old, just a newly grown young man. At that time, my parents had passed away one after another, and my relatives, considering me a burden, left me at the orphanage. I thought I would become the kind of child described in books, struggling through turbulent times. But I didn't. My life after the age of 8 was entirely supported by Rockey. He always said, "My Haley cries so much. What will you do when I'm not around?" He said this with pain in his eyes. Back then, I didn't know how to answer him. But after he was really gone, I found that I no longer needed to consider that question. I knew his death was suspicious. I would never make a mistake with my findings. But the reports I submitted were repeatedly rejected. They wanted me to let it go. They said that I couldn't afford to offend the people behind this. After losing Rockey, did I want to lose myself too? I said nothing and resolutely resigned. Rockey and I had sworn to seek justice for everyone in our own way. Moreover, today's justice also included Rockey's part, so I didn't want to look back, nor was I willing to. Rockey left me with little information, but it was clear that Tony was not someone you could easily mess with. So, when I successfully lured Tony and the police came knocking, I didn't refuse. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was only afraid that he wouldn't be brought to justice. I kept Tony hanging for a long time, time because someone like him, once things come too easily, he wouldn't value them. Sure enough, when I agreed to his proposal, he was overjoyed to the point of losing his bearings. He arranged a massive party, so large that almost all the small-time streamers came along. Tony set a time and said he would have a driver pick me up and introduce me to everyone in person. But I didn't wait for him. I want to meet someone. The person had installed a tracking device on my phone. He said, as long as you turn on your phone, we can locate you within 2 minutes. But he also said, once we locate you, you'll be exposed, and we might not have time to save you. When he said this, his eyes were filled with guilt. I looked at him and shook my head with a smile. Rockey used to say that all darkness will disappear in the place where the sun shines. He said it and did it. So do I. When I turned on my phone, I was already prepared to die on the ship. I thought, in the end, I hadn't let Rockey down. I had completed everything he wanted to do, but I didn't expect that Tony, this madman, would rather risk his life than let me go. That night, everyone on the ship was rescued, and those who had committed heinous crimes were ultimately brought to justice. Except Tony. After dragging me into the sea, he managed to escape. I wanted to drag him down with me, but he exerted all his effort to save me. He dragged me to shore, ignoring my wishes, and slapped my face almost in a breakdown, saying, "Haley, don't die. I won't allow you to die." I felt like laughing at his words. Someone like him, who was filled with evil, had no right to touch me. He took me to stay at a private estate, where my phone and communication devices were confiscated, leaving me completely unable to determine where I was or contact anyone. Tony was unexpectedly kind to me, attending to my needs every day and humbly trying to please me. But I ignored all of it. I had already seen the most beautiful moon in the world. No one else could catch my eye. Finally, one day, Tony broke down. He locked me up and began torturing me in every possible way. I watched as my skin, which Rockey had kept pristine, became ugly and disfigured, but I bit my lip and remained silent. Tony, however, would always hold me and with tearful eyes say, "If you admit you were wrong and say you love me, I'll let you go." I could not break free and just asked him, "Did you do the same to my Rockey?" Rockey was always terrified of pain. In the orphanage, we would often fight over food where the matron couldn't see. When we were children, Rockey took many beatings to protect me. The more he endured, the more afraid he became. Even as he grew up, he would clutch my hand tightly when getting a shot. 8 broken ribs and a cranial puncture. My Rockey must have been in so much pain. Tony deserved to die. Every time I mentioned Rockey, Tony would look at me with agony. He asked me, am I really so inferior to him? Inferior, indeed. He couldn't even compare to a single strand of Rockey's hair. He tortured me for a full 3 days, and I could clearly feel my consciousness fading. But I still didn't dare to sleep, afraid that if I did, I wouldn't see Tony's end. To torment me, Tony even showed me the video of Rockey before his death. He said, "Look clearly, he's dead. Just like this, died at my hands." I watched it. I saw Rockey's beautiful nose bridge broken, and his once vibrant face gradually covered in blood. I saw him, even in his final moments, gasping, saying, "In this world, evil will always be defeated by good. One day, you will surely be punished." I watched him as his features blurred, his body covered in blood, his speech slowing to a crawl, and his eyes reddened. As I was lost in the sight, the police arrived, their sirens blaring in my ears. Tony finally panicked. He grabbed me and demanded, "I clearly confiscated your phone." Hearing his words, I found it amusing. I laughed a couple of times, but stopped because of the pain. I told him, because there's also a tracker in my body, with a resolve to die. How could I let him escape easily? Tony is dead. That's what they told me when I woke up. He didn't have to die. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and stripped of his rights for life. But he couldn't accept it. He yelled and demanded to see me in prison. Unable to come to terms with it, he ended up taking his own life. They said his last words were, "Ask Haley if she ever loved me." When I heard this, I felt disgusted. How could I ever love him? The person I've always loved is Rockey. A high school student was added to my hospital room. When he arrived, he was still wearing his school uniform. They said he had depression and didn't say a word all day. Sometimes I would steal glances at him. His appearance perfectly resembled Rockey's when he was young. When Rockey was in high school, I had just graduated from elementary school. According to the orphanage rules, one had to leave at 18, and Rockey was no exception. When he was leaving with his suitcase, I clung to his leg, crying and refusing to let go. I said, "You can't leave me. I no longer have parents. I can't lose you too." At that time, Rockey was also wearing his blue high school uniform. Facing soothing my stubbornness. He simply rested his forehead in a mix of helplessness and affection, saying, "All right, Haley, stop crying. I'll take you with me. We will be together forever, never to part, okay? Okay, of course, okay." I lay in the bathtub, letting my blood mix with the hot water. Yet I felt no pain, because I knew I would soon meet my beloved, and I am the moon he revered and worshipped with all his heart. The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.